Welcome to the Hometime Project Center. I'm Dean Johnson.
And I'm Peggy Knapp. In the video you're about to see, Dean and I will be giving you step-by-step instructions for siding your house with wood lap siding.
Our project will entail removal of the existing siding on an older house, doing some repair work, installing the new horizontal redwood siding and trim, as well as adding some decorative details to the exterior.
Later in the program, we'll also be showing you other wood sidings, and we'll show you how to apply board and batten and cedar shakes.
Hometime is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you full-size Chevy vans with full-size room and hauling power. Chevy Suburban, no car-type wagon can do as much. Full-size Blazer at home and backcountry or on a city street. Full-size Chevy pickups, full-size Tough for full-size jobs. The heartbeat of America, today's Chevy trucks.
This video is just one in a library of instructional programs designed to assist the viewer in working on a wide range of home improvement projects. And before we begin our program, I want to explain how you can best make use of this educational system. First off, you should watch the tape all the way through to get an idea of the methods, the steps, and the terminology we use. To help familiarize yourself with the terms, we've included a glossary in the project guide. Then you should review the tape again, only this time, check with your project guide to determine the tools and materials appropriate to your project. Then take the project guide to your local building supply dealer or home center. The people there will be able to assist you, answer questions, and direct you to what you need.
No matter how big or small, how traditional or futuristic, the fundamental structure of a house is made of walls and floors that are composed of a series of framing members. Now, our set model here is an example of a typical exterior wall. Here you can see the vertical 2x4s or studs are nailed 16 inches apart from center to center. They're nailed to a top plate and a sill plate, which is secured to the foundation. Nailed to these framing members are panels of plywood called sheathing. Now, sheathing accomplishes two purposes. It gives the framing additional lateral support, and it gives the wood siding a sound, rigid, and even surface for nailing. Over the sheathing is a layer of Tyvek or building paper which reduces air infiltration. And then comes the wood siding. And to tell you about that, here's Dean.
The variety of sidings available today is mind-boggling. We've set up this display to give you an idea of the kinds of wood used in exteriors and their different applications. 90% of wood siding sold today is either redwood or cedar. The reason these woods are so popular is their attractive appearance, their ability to hold finishes, not to mention their natural resistance to insects and decay. Starting with the redwood sidings, you can use rabbeted bevel, plain bevel, which is what we'll be installing on our project house, tongue and groove, channel shiplap, and board and batten. A similar range comes in cedar and is installed horizontally and vertically in lumber that is free of knots and lumber that is more rustic, which you're seeing more and more. Red cedar shakes and shingles have a distinctive style, as does one-half round cedar siding. With proper application, each type of wood siding will provide the weather protection you need, as well as add value to the property. But not only does the particular siding act as a weather shield, it's also the look of the house. It's the first impression people get. And in making your selection, you want to consider which siding works best to enhance the character and lifestyle you want to create for your home. The beauty of new solid wood siding is that unless neglected, it'll last a lifetime of the house. Now let's go to Peggy, who's going to talk about tools and equipment we'll be using.
The tools and equipment needed to reside a house are based on your preference. There are hand tools, power tools, and pneumatic tools to choose from. Now, some of these tools and equipment are fairly standard to most home workshops, while others are more specialized. We'll be showing you the range of tools available and explaining their use as we work. But one important point I want to make here is that siding is a once-in-a-lifetime project, and you may not need to buy a lot of equipment that you might not use after the project is completed. Many of your tool and equipment needs can be handled at your local rental supply store, and many building supply companies rent equipment as well. And don't forget the most important tool on the job, you. Residing a house takes a lot of care and patience, and your attitude will play an important part in the final outcome.
Which brings up the issue of safety. We'll be addressing safety equipment and procedures throughout the program, but I want to mention it up front. Before you climb your ladder and rip off the first board, be safety conscious. If you're in a hurry or you think you can get by without taking the proper safety precautions, then you're asking for trouble. What we recommend is that you work at a comfortable pace, wear proper clothing and protection, and follow the manufacturer's guidelines in using their tools, materials, and equipment. Now, let's go to the project house. The exterior of your house is the first impression people get. It's much more than just a barrier against the elements. The exterior helps to define and enhance the architecture of the house, as well as the lifestyle of the people that live there. As you can see, this 80-year-old siding definitely needs some help. Some of the boards are cracked, and some of them are loose. The nail heads are rusting through the paint, and the paint is flaking off. Installing new siding on a house can be done due to major deterioration or just a desire to change the look. And sometimes, as with our project house, it's a perfect opportunity to make some improvements, like adding a new bay window, putting a railing around the porch, or doing some other embellishments. Now let's take a look at today's project. First comes planning and preparation. Then tearing off the old siding, repairing the sheathing, installing the trim, installing the siding, and caulking.
We're measuring the exterior of the house to estimate the number of square feet of wood siding that we'll need for the job. It's a fairly simple calculation. First, we section off the exterior into rectangular areas, measure them, then we multiply the widths times the lengths, and then total those figures.
Now here's a tip on measuring triangular areas like gables where the two sides are of equal length. First, I measure down from the peak to a point where the siding begins to taper. That's about 7 feet. Then I measure from this midpoint across, and that also gives me about 7 feet. Then I multiply these two together, or in other words, 7 times 7 equals 49 square feet. I also don't want to forget to include the amount of overlap in my calculations. For this house, we're going to be using 4-inch wide boards. 4 inches is the nominal dimension. The net width is actually 3.5 inches wide. The exposure of the boards will be 3 inches. So this means that in our estimating of materials, we want to account for the 1/2 inch that will be covered by the overlap. That adds up. Also in our estimating of materials, we'll measure and subtract for the dimensions of windows and doors from our totals.
Most wood siding is sold by the linear foot, so you'll have to convert that into square feet for your estimate. Now, it's always a good idea to add 10% to your estimate for waste and later possible replacement. Your siding supplier and home center salespeople can help you calculate your square footage and figure out just how much material you'll need for your home.
During the planning and preparation stage, you'll also want to examine the exterior for obstacles and accessories that will need to be removed: shutters, light fixtures, and downspouts. And you may have to turn off the utility meter temporarily, which would require the services of your local utility company. Another aspect of planning is the building permit. Codes and permits vary from state to state and even county to county, so it's best to check with your local building department.
Another factor in preparing for the project is timing. It's best to allow for plenty of time and give yourself a break every now and then to step back and recharge.
Now we're ready to start the tear-off. And to help us with the project, we rented some aluminum stepladders and a 16-foot plank. This will give us the ease and capability to both tear off and install a large section of siding at a time. When renting ladders and scaffolding, every precaution should be taken to ensure your safety. If you're planning to rent stepladders and scaffolding, let the rental people know what you need it for, the heights you'll be working at, and they'll give you the type that fits your job, tell you how it's to be erected, and the safety measures to follow.
I'm setting up an extension ladder here to work on the gable. An aluminum extension ladder is a standard piece of equipment for re-siding. They're lightweight and they can be extended to whatever height you need. Now, a safe angle for setting up an extension ladder is about 75 degrees, or by putting the base of the ladder away from the wall, about 1/4 the ladder's height. To protect the shrubs around the house, we've laid down drop cloths. In beginning the tear-off and repair process, we want to start at the top and work down. I'm going to be using a hammer and a pry bar to tear off these pieces of siding. In removing the siding, it's a good idea to work in sections, tearing off and installing the new before moving on. Since this is a modest-size house, we're going to strip it off all at once. As you work, it's best to clean up as you move around the house. This will help prevent accidents such as tripping over old boards and stepping on nails. We rented a trailer to haul all the debris away.
With the siding off here, you can get a glimpse of the elements that make up the framework of a typical exterior wall. Covering the studs is the sheathing, made up of horizontal board. In newer homes, this sheathing is plywood, oriented strand board, wafer board, or gypsum panels. This sheathing works to strengthen the structure, to provide a solid base for nailing the siding, and adds a little more insulating value to the exterior. Covering the sheathing is a layer of tar paper that acts as a moisture barrier. And then comes the siding, which in this case is a bevel lap siding.
Now that we've removed the old siding, we want to inspect the sheathing for any damaged areas, areas where water rot might have weakened the sheathing and the structure. You want to look for any nails that might have lifted, and in general, make sure that the old sheathing is tight and anchored down real well. This is a good time to establish where the studs are for nailing the siding. I'm marking the eaves, and then I'll mark the foundation along each of the studs, and then later snap a chalk line between those marks. This is also a good time to upgrade the insulation in the exterior walls. In examining the old sheathing, we found several boards near the foundation that had deteriorated and needed to be replaced.
I'm replacing the old sheathing with some 3/4-inch boards to fit the opening. Since I'm cutting halfway on the studs, I used a nail cutting blade on the circular saw. A reciprocating saw would also do the job. To speed up the nailing process, I'm using a pneumatic nail gun with 8-penny nails.
The gun is driven by an air compressor, and because of its power, you should be extra careful when handling it. Eye protection should always be worn by the person operating the nailer and anyone else in the work area. Disconnect the gun from the compressor when loading it, servicing it, or when it's not in use. Connect it to the air supply only when you're ready to nail. You also want to make sure that the compressor regulator is set at the recommended pressure for the tool. And when you're using it, always keep safety in mind.
As you can see, I take the nail gun and place it flush against the sheathing and then press. In nailing, I want to set the nails 6 inches apart along the edge and about every foot in the field into the studs.
Along with replacing some damaged sheathing, we're also going to be doing some remodeling. Tearing off the old siding gives us access to the framing from the outside, so this is the perfect time to install a bay window and other architectural millwork.
Now that I've got the unit in the opening where the old window used to go, I want to shim for level and we'll nail it in by hand along the flange.
To protect the house from air infiltration, we're applying a layer of house wrap. A house wrap is a fairly new polyethylene fabric made of high-density fibers, and it comes in rolls 9 feet wide and 195 feet long.
The spun-bonded fibers allow vapor to pass through so you don't end up with a dry rot condition in your wall.
You can also use building paper, which is asphalt-impregnated paper that's applied to the sheathing in overlapping rows.
Different regions of the country have their own climatic conditions, so it's best to check with your local building department to find out what's appropriate to your area. When properly applied, they'll both prevent the wind from penetrating the house through either a crack or joint in the siding.
Fastening is a cinch. We're using a sheathing tape to join the seams and staples along the perimeter and in the field. We just need it to stay in place. The siding nails will secure it permanently. It's kind of like gift wrapping a box, only on a much larger scale. Once the layer of house wrap is applied, we want to snap a chalk line between the marks that I made earlier. This will serve as a guide for nailing into the framing members.
Upon delivery, you want to make a safe and dry area for your new wood siding to be stored until you're going to install it. Moisture can warp and damage the wood, so it's best to store it out of the weather and up off the ground. We're using some scrap 2x4s to distribute the weight more evenly. And then we cover it all with 6mm poly. Before you begin nailing any siding, make double sure your first piece of siding is perfectly level. To do this, we'll use a carpenter's level. Because it's fragile, I always keep the level in a safe place until I'm ready to use it. And there isn't a safer place for it than behind the seats of the Chevy S10 Maxi Cab. There's over 18 cubic feet of room behind the front seats of this truck. With that much space, I can easily keep all my tools inside. And because they're inside, I don't have to worry about them getting wet from rain and snow or banged up from sliding around in the bed. And most important, I can keep them under lock and key.
Besides protecting your tools and other gear, this Maxi Cab has another great feature: optional jump seats. Just open up the recessed seats located on both sides of the cab, and within seconds, this Maxi Cab will carry up to 4 adults.
If your home project is a big one like siding, this two-wheel drive S10 Maxi Cab with optional V6 can haul up to 5,000 pounds when properly equipped. That includes trailer, passengers, and cargo.
Sounds like the Chevy S10 Maxi Cab has a lot to offer, doesn't it? Well, those are only a few good reasons why nothing works like a Chevy truck.
As we install the trim, Peggy and I will be working in sections, starting at the eaves. Much of the appearance and weather protection of a house is right here where the eaves and the roof meet the exterior wall. This is called the cornice, and there are basically 3 kinds. Here's Peggy to tell you about them.
An open cornice is where the overhanging rafters are exposed. On a closed cornice, the rafters end at the sheathing, and they're covered by a fascia board. The box cornice is where the overhanging rafters are covered by a soffit board and a fascia board, like the house we're residing.
This house has a box cornice, which is made up of framing members, the soffit, the fascia board, the frieze board, and bed molding. In your planning and preparation stage, you want to carefully inspect your cornice for cracks and water damage to determine whether or not it will need repair or replacement. We had to replace some of the soffit and fascia boards because the boards were loose and cracked. The frieze board is a piece of trim that runs along the top edge of the wood siding. It comes from a classic term for a decorative band around a room displaying letters or sculpture.
For the frieze board, the fascia board, and the door and the window trim, we're using clear redwood, and later we'll apply a coat of trim paint. Now for cutting the wood, you can use a standard miter box, a hand saw, a circular saw, or a power miter saw like we're using. But for speed and accuracy in making the kind of cuts that we'll need, there's nothing quite like the power miter saw. Now, as with all power tools, attention to safety is of the utmost importance. Before operating the power miter, you should read the manufacturer's instructions. You always want to keep this guard in place and always wear safety glasses. When servicing the tool, making adjustments, or changing blades, be sure and disconnect the power cord. I'm securing the wood with a clamp before I make the cut. This keeps my hands out of the path of the saw blade and helps me make a more accurate cut. Before we install the corner trim, we want to put up the skirt board, which overlaps the foundation. Now, we snapped a level chalk line to line up the top of the board. The skirt board not only protects the foundation from water, but it also serves as a guide for our successive rows of beveled boards.
Now we want to attach a strip of Z-shaped metal flashing along the top of the skirt board. This is called a drip cap because it causes water to drip to the ground as opposed to running under the wood. We will also be installing a drip cap above the windows and doors, as well as some step flashing along the roof.
Where the siding meets the roof shingles, I want to install metal step flashing to prevent water from running up under the wood. Working from the bottom where the two converge, I bend a piece of the metal flashing, slide it up underneath the shingle against the sheathing, and then I continue in the same way all the way up to the top.
With the skirt boards completed, we next want to build our inside and outside corner treatments, as well as the door and window trim. For this outside corner, I've applied a flat 1x4 to the face side of the building and butted up to it a 1x3. This creates equal dimensions. The lap siding will butt up against these corner boards.
For the inside corners, we're nailing 2x2 boards to the studs. Now these should be the same kiln-dried top grade of lumber used for the siding and the outside corners. And here again, the siding will butt up against it.
We're using a clear wood finish to protect the redwood from the weather, and especially to repel water. This product contains an ingredient that prevents discoloration from mildew. We're applying the finish now before we install the siding so that all sides of the wood will be sealed. And by finishing the wood on the ground, it minimizes that much more work later on ladders or scaffold. With this done, we're now ready to install the redwood siding. One way to ensure the wood siding is installed straight and true is to make a story pole. What I've done is take a straight 1x4 board marked off in 3-inch increments for the wood siding exposure. Now I want to transfer my marks to the wall. I'll do the same to all the corners.
Our bevel lap siding requires a starter board along the drip edge to give the first row of siding the same angle as the successive rows. Now we're using a piece of wood 1/4 inch thick and 1 inch wide, and I'll nail it right here along the drip edge.
Okay, Peggy, here's the first one.
Good. Now, as you can see, siding is a two-person job. We're using a pre-cut 3-inch block to help maintain the exposure along the length of the siding. Okay. As we work up the wall, we want to constantly check the 3-inch exposure and check for level.
The siding nails we're using are 8-penny ring shank galvanized siding nails, which means that they're corrosion resistant. As you can see, they're especially colored to match the redwood. I want to drive the nail just above the board below, making sure to penetrate the stud 1.5 inches. You'll find that at the end of boards and at mitered corners, the nail has a tendency to split the wood. To prevent this from happening, a good tool to have on hand is a push drill. Using a drill bit that is half the diameter of the nail, I pre-drill the holes. This breaks down the resistance enough for the nails to drive clean.
The plastic cap on the head of the hammer will keep us from breaking the color off the head of the nail. Now, all the nails are driven flush with the surface of the siding. A countersunk nail will cause a holding pocket for water unless a correct filler is applied. Now, if we were planning to paint the new siding, then we'd countersink and fill with an exterior spackling putty.
As we progress row by row, we want to make sure to stagger the joints. We do this for a couple of reasons. First, it keeps the water from running down the siding in a groove, plus the fact that random pattern siding is much more visually appealing.
You'll find that redwood and cedar siding come in bundles that vary in length from 3 to 16 feet. And in planning your job, you want to utilize the long and the short to their best advantage. That means you don't want to cut a 2-foot piece out of a 16-foot board when a 3-footer will do.
There are a couple of joints that can be made, the butt joint and the bevel joint. The butt joint is just what it says. The ends are cut square and butted together, leaving an 1/8 inch expansion space.
Now in the bevel joint, the ends are cut at an angle so that they overlap one another. Now that's done so that any shrinkage in the wood won't be visible because there'll be wood behind the joint. But in either application, you do want the joint directly over the framing member.
Around the top of the window frame, I'll be making an inside or a pocket cut, leaving an 1/8 inch gap around the top of the window for ease of fit and expansion of the siding. Using a jigsaw, I first cut the 2 parallel lines. Then going back to the first cut, I make a curved cut and follow the line down to the second cut. Then I go back and square the curved corner.
Now, as we work our way up the wall, we want to recheck our measurements and check for level. And although our program is on wood siding, there's lots of other ways to cover the exterior of a house.
Okay, now we're ready to cut for our gable. To gauge the angle of the eave, I'm using a bevel square. Placing the handle on the top board, I position the blade flush with the eave and tighten the wing nut.
And then I just transfer this angle to my board. Now I only have to take this measurement once, since both sides of the gable are the same angle. Got it?
Okay, stick up the pencil mark.
Okay.
I've got 49 and a half.
Okay, it's real tight here.
You got it there?
Yeah.
All right. Now that all the wood siding is installed, we want to seal up all the joints with caulking. This means all the places where the siding meets the trim, around all the windows, doors, eaves, and especially around any protruding features like faucets and utility pipes. By sealing these areas, we prevent moisture from penetrating the exterior. This will also make the house more energy efficient by sealing off drafts. I apply the caulk a section at a time. Running a bead and then smoothing it out with my finger. I'm using a copolymer caulk that comes in translucent colors and withstands the abuse of severe climate changes.
Now the final step in our project will be painting, and the important thing here is to apply a coat of oil-based primer to all the trim and molding wherever the wood is raw, no matter what kind of finish paint you're going to be using. So what do you think? I think it looks great. And I think even though it took a lot of care and patience and careful planning, it was well worth it.
Siding is a tough job, but if you take it a step at a time, understand the tools and the materials, you should have no problem getting the professional-looking results you want and saving a major portion of the expense by doing the work yourself.
Now, not all of you will be siding the entire house the way we did, but the information in this tape also applies to siding an addition, closing in a porch, and building a doghouse to match the house.
Now let's go back to the studio for more information on other siding applications.
We want to give you an idea of some other types of exterior wood siding and their installation. Probably the easiest and quickest wood siding to install is plywood or hardboard panels. They come in a range of thicknesses, patterns, and textures in square-edged interlocking and groove panels. They come in 4x8, 4x9, and 4x10 foot sizes. And they can be nailed into studs, furring strips, or over existing flat siding. The siding that we're going to install is a cedar reverse board and batten.
The paneling should lap below the sheathing to cover the sill plate. Corner trim is typically installed over the panels.
The nails we're using are 8-penny double-dip galvanized nails. Now, the important thing when lining up these panels is that the joint fall over a stud or a firm nailing surface. Now, because these panels have a shiplap edge, we're lining them up so that the right edge of the first panel is face out, and then the next panel will overlap that.
As we progress down the wall, we want to make certain that our vertical is plumb. If the wall is higher than your panel, you can insert what's called Z-bar flashing. It's a strip of metal that rides over the lower piece of paneling and up underneath the top piece. When cutting panels with a circular saw, it's best to place the panel exterior face down. This is to avoid the ragged edge that circular saws produce. Now, this gets tricky. When you're measuring to cut around a window or a door, you have to compensate for the corner. And as with board siding, when cutting around windows and doors, you want to include an additional 1/8 inch on the cut for expansion and ease of fit. This gap and all other gaps will later be sealed with caulk or covered with trim.
In board and batten siding, instead of overlapping the ends, we butt the panels up against each other, leaving a 1/4 inch gap for expansion. And that will later be covered with boards like these.
Another easy and attractive way to side your house is with cedar shingles or shakes. They can be applied to firm sheathing or over the existing siding. Estimating for the amount of shingles for your house is the same as for other types of wood siding. The only difference is that they come in bundles. For our demonstration, we're going to install them over sheathing that's been covered with a layer of tar paper. As with horizontal siding, you can use a story pole to define our shingle courses. You'll find a chart in the project guide that indicates the maximum exposure allowed for the type and length of shingle you're using.
I'm using ring-shanked galvanized nails here, and I'll put the nails in about 1/2 inch above the end of the shingle. 2 nails per shingle, and leaving about a 1/4 inch gap for expansion. Now, this first row of shingles I want to double so that I establish the correct angle for successive rows.
There are basically 2 different approaches to treating the corners for wood shingles and shakes. You can pre-install the inside and outside corner trim like this, and then flush the shingles to the 1x4 and 1x3 boards. Another method is to alternate the corners, like so.
Now, when I start my second course of shingles, I want to tack up and level a board to act as a nailing guide. Then the important thing to remember when you're starting your second course is you don't want the seams to line up, but you want to overlap them at least 1.5 inches.
On our project house, you saw us apply a clear finish to the redwood siding. Now we'd like to talk about stains. There are basically 2 types of stains: semi-transparent and solid. Both come in either an oil or a latex base. Now, the techniques of painting a house apply to staining. The semi-transparent stain is very thin, and as you can see, the stain is absorbed into the wood fiber. An important thing to know when staining is to stir the bucket repeatedly throughout the process. The pigment in semi-transparent stain is very fine and will settle to the bottom. If not stirred, you'll soon find that the coloration of the stain will darken as you work down into the bucket where all the pigment is settled. Now I want to show you solid stain. As you can see, there's a lot more pigment than the semi-transparent, and yet it still allows the texture of the wood to show. Now, whether you apply a semi-transparent or solid stain, a clear finish, or coat of paint, with this step, your project's complete.
We hope this video helps make your siding project more manageable. As we said before, siding a house is a major operation, but with good planning, a little patience, and careful execution, it's not that tough, and the results are terrific.
As with most things, there are variables with every project. Particular problems special to your house we weren't able to cover in our video presentation. If you'd like additional information on the subject of wood siding, check the bibliography at the end of the companion project guide. And if you're planning on doing more home projects yourself, be sure and check out our other titles.
And if you've never seen our Hometime TV show, well, tune us in sometime as we explore and explain ways to beautify and maintain your home.
Hometime is made possible by Chevrolet, who brings you Chevy Suburban, America's superwagon, Chevy Astro, the van that can, S10 Blazer, America's most popular sport utility vehicle, full-size Chevy pickups, full-size tough for full-size jobs, the heartbeat of America, today's Chevy trucks.
I'm Peggy Knapp.
And I'm Dean Johnson. So long.